2017 had to feel really good for Buffalo Bills fans. You're talking about a team that hadn't made the playoffs since the 1999 season. You got a first-year head coach in Sean McDermott. And with what happened in Week 17 of that season, the late miraculous victory by the Bengals over the Ravens, the Bills, lo and behold, made the playoffs. First time in 18 seasons. Exciting stuff. Not so exciting was the result in the playoff game, but nonetheless made it, snapping the longest playoff drought in the NFL. It didn't belong to the Cleveland Browns, actually, because they went back in 2002. It was the Buffalo Bills, but no longer. The interesting thing about this Bills team, though, you would say for a team that made the playoffs that you would want to kind of build upon that momentum and you would want to try and get more out of that team since you already got to a certain point under 1 year of your head coach. But it was really interesting that this offseason, you could clearly see the Bills making a statement as an organization that it was great to make the playoffs in year one, and that's all fine and dandy. But the reality is that they weren't good enough. They most certainly were not good enough to usurp the Patriots in the AFC East. And realistically, the way they were constructed, they were never going to be a championship contending team. And they weren't. And it was an interesting call. You got the Tyrod Taylor move in the offseason, managing to con the Browns out of a third-round pick for a high-end backup quarterback. What that really signaled, though, was that the Buffalo Bills were, I don't want to say in a full-on tank mode, but they clearly understood that this was not a time to reload. This was a time to retool and rebuild. And a lot of people looking at this team before the season expected them to be in the mix to get the #1 overall pick. They were still a bad team this year at times, but they weren't the worst team in the league by any stretch of the imagination, especially when you look at the defensive side of the ball. You look at this team defensively, and statistically, they were an elite unit in 2018. They were 16th against the run, yes, so kind of middle of the road, but they had the #1 passing defense in the NFL. They were second in total yards allowed, which is why they were able to go into win games like in Minnesota. Remember that win where you thought Minnesota was just going to clean their clocks, and Buffalo went into Minnesota and destroyed them? Then you had the win against Tennessee. So they were able to get a couple of quality wins. That defense had some times and moments where they played at a really, really, really high level. The challenge is, though, is they were like elite with an asterisk, an elite defensive unit. But part of that is because teams didn't have to do a lot offensively in order to beat them because the Bills' offense was so bad. They were a top 10 team running the ball, but 31st in passing yards a game, 28th in total yards per game. You had 10 games where this offense scored under 20 points. And if you can't even score 20 points on a consistent basis in the National Football League, you're not going to win a lot of games. You're just not, regardless of how good your defense may or may not be. Especially when 5 of those 10 games that I just referenced, they scored 10 points or less. When you're looking at the Bills and you're saying, hey, defense, maybe some running game, maybe they could be the Jaguars of 2017 and 2018, that wasn't really in the cards because that offense was so far behind. Like at least with the Jags, you could say in 2017 that Fournette had a really good year running the ball as a rookie and Blake Bortles was up and down, but you had some ups. We didn't have a lot of ups for this offense in general, and that's why they weren't the Jaguars of 2017 and 2018. That's why. And you could clearly see that this team understood that they weren't going to be that good. So I kind of applaud them for having the courage of, especially coming off of a playoff appearance, understanding that they needed to really rethink and reshape their roster. Because a lot of other front offices and organizations wouldn't have had that same courage. They wouldn't have had that same courage, but the Bills did. And when you look at their 2018 draft class, it's ultimately going to be about those 2 first-round picks, Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds. And the way they navigated up the draft board to get Josh Allen, if you really look at it, what this team did was they took Cordy Glenn and took him combined with the 21st pick to move up to 12th overall. Then they took the 12th overall pick, threw in a couple of second-round picks in that 2018 draft to move up to number 7 to get Josh Allen. Josh Allen was the quarterback with the most raw talent and physical upside in that draft class. It remains to be seen what level of quarterback he can or cannot be in the National Football League. I think you saw kind of a mixed bag out of him as a rookie, frankly. You saw moments where he could make big plays, he could make big throws, he most certainly could make big runs, but his accuracy is still a question. But it's really, really hard to evaluate him after his rookie season because that offense was so atrocious. You put any of those rookie quarterbacks, including the golden one, Baker Mayfield, into this Buffalo situation, how much better are they really going to look? That is a fair question. But what was key to me for the Bills was that they got their long-term, they feel, franchise guy without having to give up any draft pick currency in 2019 or 2020. That was good. That was their design. That was their goal. And that's what they were able to accomplish by the multiple moves they made up the draft board in that 2018 draft. The question is, long-term, would they have been better off just sitting there instead of getting a first-round pick to move back in 2017 for 2018's draft if they were just sitting there and taking Patrick Mahomes or Deshaun Watson instead? Long-term, that's what this organization is going to be measured against, is that decision to pass on those two guys and ultimately selecting Josh Allen. As far as Tremaine Edmonds goes, he had a really, really good close to the season. He's a really young player, really exciting, lots of physical upside, really still learning how to play linebacker. If he can ever figure it out, he is going to be a stud and a difference maker. So in theory, when you look at these two guys, this Bills team could potentially feel like long-term they have their quarterback of their offense and their quarterback of their defense. And when you start off with those two kind of foundational pieces, you feel like you're in a pretty good place. Heading into this offseason, the Bills have a little over $87 million in cap space, so they can go out there in the marketplace and be aggressive. And in part, they would have to bring in some key talent, especially because it's Buffalo. It's not exactly like a premier organization. Who the hell wants to go to Buffalo unless you pay me for it? So, but they have the money. They'll be able to find guys that they want, and they just shouldn't go out there and recklessly spend just to spend the money. In terms of their own free agents, you got guys like Lorenzo Alexander, Ryan Groy, Jordan Mills, John Miller. So if they want to re-sign all those guys, cap space is not going to be the issue. So that's a good thing. There's no challenge for them. The challenge really becomes is who do they really have that's worth keeping other than a couple of those guys that I just named. What do they target in free agency? You would have to assume, some help at the skill positions, maybe some help on that offensive line. The bottom line I'm getting at here is, while you could still improve that defense a little bit, this offseason between free agency, the trade market, draft, has to be dedicated to the offensive side of the ball and helping out your young quarterback. The Buffalo Bills should be attempting to be players in the Antonio Brown sweepstakes. There's no question about it. You've got a ton of cap space. You have a massive need. You at least have to make the call and at least make the effort. That doesn't mean you trade for him. That doesn't mean you'll get him. But you must make the effort. You must. Because you need a couple of wide receivers in the worst way. You cannot continue to trot out there somebody like Josh Allen, who you're putting the hopes of your franchise for the next 10, 15, 20 years on, and expect him to be successful throwing to guys like Kelvin Benjamin and Zay Jones. That just can't happen. Your best wide receiver in Buffalo last year was an undrafted kid from Alabama named Robert Foster. You need more help at that position badly. You need a young, multi-purpose back to replace LaShawn McCoy. You need a tight end that you can sit there and utilize with Charles Clay in two tight end sets and eventually replace Charles Clay, hopefully somebody that can be healthy and more reliable and dependable. You still could use some help on that offensive line. I'm not sure they fully replaced Cordy Glenn and what he was able to do when he's healthy as a left tackle in this league. The bottom line is this draft has to be about offense. This free agency has to be about offense for the Buffalo Bills. Because if you can fix some of that offense, you don't have to solve everything, but if you can make that offense better, more viable, more reliable, more potent, a little more explosive, with that defense, you could see this Bills team make a run at the playoffs again in 2019. What you must avoid are any stupid decisions like the types of stupid decisions that saw Sean McDermott think that Nathan Peterman was worth a try as a starting quarterback not once but multiple times in the 2018 season. Like the experience in San Diego in 2017 wasn't enough to ever scare you off from that. He thought that Peterman was the guy. Good God. It makes you wonder how this guy was able to win as many games as he was and his defense was as good as it was because he was so blatantly idiotic when it came to the most important position on the team. That said, though, you moved on from Nathan Peterman. We can keep Josh Allen healthy and you give Josh Allen help, the Bills could be much improved in 2019.